As far as the systems goes, let's talk about the land, the economics, and the crops. So this is some numbers-based information and how we formulate our production on our farm. So the basis of our market garden is nothing new. It's similar to Elliott Coleman, French intensive. This is where square foot gardening meets commercial production. We're using everything as a standard unit of production, and it's a 30-inch bed. And the walkway can vary based on your own personal needs. We have been able to get away with 10-inch walkways, so we can pack a little bit more. I've gone down to 6 at times, but that's a bit tight. And so that's the basis of our farm, and that's more or less a standardization. And the thing that's great about a 30-inch bed is that most people, not everybody, but most people can stand over a bed like this. They can straddle the bed. You can be in different positions to work that bed. You can reach across it both ways. A lot of organic farmers or organic growers do a double reach bed, which is a 4-foot wide bed. And the idea there is that you can reach halfway into the bed from either side. But if any of you have done 4-foot beds and you've had to do that reach day in and day out, it's pretty bad on the lower back. And I would rather save my back. So we can have multiple positions on the bed, but the other thing I like about it is it creates access. And because most of what I do on my farm is called high rotation planting, in that each bed will be rotated multiple times a season, and I'm going to explain that in a minute, is that I want access. I want to get in and out as fast as I can following the path of least resistance. So the beautiful thing about a 30-inch bed is that I don't have to just walk around the perimeter of the plot and then walk down the line to get to that bed. I can just walk across the beds, right? These are things, little things that seem, okay, well, yeah, sure, that's common sense, Curtis. Why don't you give us something that's more interesting? Well, again, multiply that by 1,000 times moving across that plot in a season. If you save 30 seconds each time, multiply that by 1,000. That time adds up. So it's all about looking at these things to create easy, the path of least resistance, easy flow in and out. That's what the bed is all about. But the bed also is an economic unit of production. So for the most part on our farm, we've standardized 50-foot beds. So that would be beds like this. There are different size beds here and there just because as urban farmers, we're often limited by the physical constraints of the plots that we're in, whether we're surrounded by buildings or we've got fences or we've got boulevards or whatever it is. We're limited by that physical constraint. So we do have to adjust here and there, but as often as I can, I'll target a 50-foot bed. But you can make your beds however big you want. But everything I look at as far on a production standpoint is based on 2 categories of land. I call them high rotation and birotation. And so what I'm assuming is that if you're an urban farm on a small piece of land, there shouldn't be anywhere on your farm that only produces 1 crop a season. That's just not effective. It's not profitable. So to grow corn, long season potatoes, winter squash, melons, potatoes, grains, this eliminates a lot of crops. And that's okay because rural farmers will always grow those crops and they might be better set up for those. On the urban standpoint, it's different. We need to maximize. You know, if you look at Cuba, there was a presentation, the keynote last year was about the Cuban special period. If you look at what happened in Cuba, they did the exact same thing. It's high rotation planting. They weren't growing melons and squash in the cities. They were growing salad greens and fast growing vegetables, radishes, things that could be consumed close to where they were produced, that suffered less from transport, because the long season crops can be transported. You can grow grain 1,000 miles away and it's not going to lose much nutritional value to transport it here. However, salad greens from Central Valley, California, 4,000 miles across the continent do. So there's some logical thinking behind that as well. So how this works is that all of the land on my farm is based on the distance of my home base. So my home base is this orange dot here. I live there. That's the main base of operations for our farm. That's our central pivot point. Everything else is a certain amount of miles away. So our furthest plot is actually 3 miles away. When I started, though, I will tell you that I had plots all over the city, and I probably spent half of my time in transit. which wasn't efficient. And this is why I came up with this system, was to organize my land based on the amount of activity that land generates. So the inner core is where I want high rotation stuff. So this is beds that are being rotated multiple times. It's the fastest growing crops that grow there. These beds will have up to 4 crops a season. Generally speaking, they will generate $1,600 per 50-foot bed. So you can break that down to $32 per linear foot. And that's an average. I have quadrupled that average on some crops. Like I have gone way over that. And there's some times where I've had a series of crop failures where I've gone slightly below it. But this is an average of my 8 years farming that I've put together to say this is the average of what these types of beds can generate. And there's lots of anomalies in there because some crops produce more than others. But that's the average. So that means that in a 2,000 square foot area, we can generate about $20,000 of revenue. Here's a perfect example of it. 12 50-foot beds in a 2,000 square foot area. So that 2,000 square foot is counting for the walkways and the perimeter. Those 12 beds will generate $19,000 of revenue. That's a Canadian growing season too. That's nothing special. There's a little bit of season extension there with some poly low tunnels on the ground in April, but that's it. There's no heated greenhouses. There's nothing going into Christmas time or into the new year. This is sort of an 8-month season. So this is transferable pretty much everywhere I've been. And when you get into the more warmer climates, Florida, the deep south, or Southern California, you can pretty much grow year round, and you can get these numbers a lot higher. So the high rotations are the areas of most activity closest to me. Since I'm going to those places often, I don't want them to be far away because that just means I spend more time in transit. And even if you're operating on a single site farm, you can design your farm this way too. Is wherever your post-harvest shed is, where your walk-in cooler is, where you're washing things, that's where you want to have the blocks of land closest to that area, and the things that are less intensive can be further away. So it's strictly logistics. And so the bi-rotation are the areas that are further away. And so again, nowhere, in my opinion, should urban farmers be growing single crop, 1 crop per bed per season. We need to do 2 to get the kind of numbers that I'm going to show you. So bi-rotation just means that there'll be 2 crops in that bed. So I break that up into a primary crop and a secondary crop. The primary crop in a bi-rotation area is the crop that's there for the longest. So if it was a summer squash like a zucchini or a patty pan, that crop would be in there for multiple months. But I could have a quick growing crop on the preliminary or like before it or after it or post crop, depending on what it is. Kale would be the opposite. Kale would be my primary crop, goes in early, finishes early, and then I'd have another quick growing crop after that. So I can have at the very least 2 crops. So these plots will generate about half the revenue, but we'll take about less than half of the work. So they're just, generally speaking, a lot easier to maintain. So this idea is nothing new at all. This has all been done before, and this guy named Johann Heinrich von Thunen came up with this concept 100 or more years ago. We're almost 200 years from this. And this is what he called the Thunen rings. And this was at a time when city-states were almost the form of governance. And the governments were centralized into cities. And they were looking at how they would produce and have agriculture to feed the people in that city, and how they would organize it based on the barriers, like whether they be cold storage or how long that crop takes to produce and things like this. So ranging in livestock, that just doesn't make any sense to have in a city because animals need space. Big animals need space. Grains and field crops, same type of thing. Forests, maybe in a permaculture sense, these are food forests and things like that. Dairy farming is a little bit more intensive, so it can be a little bit closer to the center. But in the center, this is a 200-year-old idea, market gardening, right there in the center. And that's what it was called too, market gardening. So growing veg, quick growing veg. And the primary reason for this back then was storage, in that if you were going to grow lettuce and they didn't have the type of refrigeration that we have today, that lettuce needed to be consumed close to where it was produced. So that was the main logic here. But the concept is similar when we talk about logistics of managing the land. So within this land hierarchy, there's a crop hierarchy as well. And I grow two types of crops, and there are lots of crops. And so what this does is it eliminates a ton of crops. So I try to get urban farmers and small growers to look at crops that have faster days to maturity. So cut salad greens, baby root vegetables, some annual herbs, microgreens would be in there. There's lots of crops on there. You know, just look in your seed catalog, and anything that says 60 days to maturity or less, that's a quick growing crop. And so I prioritize that. This is sort of an 80-20 thing for me, just like the Pareto principle. 80% of the crops on my farm are quick crops, 20% would be steady crops. So the steady crop is a longer season crop. And the reason I call it a steady crop is because it's steadily harvested. So a crop like onions wouldn't be a steady crop because you plant it in the ground, it takes 100 days to mature, and you harvest it, it's all ready at once. A crop like kale, you plant it in the ground, it might take 65 to 85 days to mature, but you continuously harvest it, right? Tomatoes would be another example. Indeterminate tomatoes that go in the ground, they set fruits as they climb, and you continuously harvest on them. So if I'm going to grow any long season crop on my farm, I want to grow a crop that has a continual yield because it's really about the return that we get from that. So that eliminates a lot of stuff. All the pumpkins, the melons, the winter squash, potatoes, most potatoes, corn. You know, never grow corn. If you're a market gardener, that's the number one crop you don't want to grow. There's no money in corn. So that's the basis. That's how this all comes together. Here's some of those crops. I have grown all kinds of vegetables, and these are the ones that I've identified as the higher value. This isn't all of them. This is just sort of a collage of some of them. And most of them are quick growing. Tomatoes aren't quick growing. The patty pan squash, that's a steady crop that's continuously picked, the summer squash. But there's still a good amount of variety there. And a market garden that is small can still have a good amount of vegetables on the table at a farmer's market to bring people in. You don't have to have all that other stuff. There's still enough variety here to engage the marketplace. And this is the ultimate lens. This is the ultimate checklist that I follow on my farm that determines whether I want to grow that crop or not. So you can use this as an exercise. And there's 5 categories here that basically score a yes or a no for each of them. And the only one that's in order of importance is popularity. If a crop isn't popular, it can be $1 million a pound and you can grow it till you're blue in the face, but if nobody wants it, it's not worth anything. My dad always used to say, something is only worth what people are willing to pay. And so popularity is the ultimate thing that determines whether that crop should be grown in your farm or not. And then the rest of these aren't in order of importance, but they are important. So second thing is days to maturity. Can that crop be grown in 60 days or less? If it can, it's a yes. If it's a no, it doesn't mean I won't grow it. We're just going to get a score here that's a 3 out of 5, 4 out of 5, 5 out of 5. And the yield. What's the yield of that crop? My benchmark that I write about in my book is half a pound per linear foot in a bed. So a 25-foot bed would yield 12.5 pounds overall. 50-foot bed would yield 25 pounds overall. So I'm interested in the yield. So again, if it doesn't achieve that yield, doesn't mean I won't grow it, because it might score well on the other things. But it's the broad picture that's going to give me a sense of whether I should grow that crop or not. And the fourth thing is price. What's the price per pound or kilo? My benchmark is $4 a pound. If I can get $4 a pound for that crop, that scores a yes. Doesn't mean I won't grow it, because some things like heirloom tomatoes might be a little bit less, or large size carrots might be a bit less. So it's just a yes or a no. The fifth thing is the season, and this one's very important. How long can I get that crop throughout the year? So my benchmark is 4 months. If I can get that crop for 4 months of the year, a standard growing season being 8 months, it means I can have that crop for at least half of the season. And almost all of my crops except tomatoes I can do that with. So again, it doesn't mean I won't grow it, it just means that it won't score there. So if you go ahead and take these down and then go and take a list of all the things you want to grow, you know, probably in the winter we're checking off things in the seed catalog and seeing what we want to grow. Put them through that grading process because it's going to be different for everybody. You know, for myself, things like arugula score a 5 out of 5. Lettuce scores a 5 out of 5. Cherry tomatoes might be a 3 out of 5 for me. It all depends on what your marketplace is telling you, what the price you can get, and the yields will differ from place to place too. So that's my grading system. That's how I decide what to grow. And my general rule of thumb here is the smaller the farm, the higher on the crop value rating I want. The larger the farm, the lower I can go. So on a quarter-acre farm, quarter-acre urban farm, I would tell that farmer to only grow crops that score a 4 to a 5 out of 5 and eliminate everything else. You go up to a half acre, you can get a little bit more diversity because that's probably needed to move that kind of volume. Because we can't just scale a salad farm. You know, a quarter acre can be just a salad farm. We can't just 10x that and expect to move that much salad unless we're ready to export, which in that case your prices go down. So usually in a market gardening space, more diversity, crop diversity, is how you scale. So quarter acre, 4 to 5, I would just say 5 out of 5. Go to a third acre, you can have 4 to 5, maybe the odd 3. You go to 3/4 of an acre and up, you can go down to 2 and 1. I would never, even past an acre, grow ones. So that would be things like corn and melons and winter squash. Even the best market gardeners I know, like Jean-Martin Fortier in Quebec, he has his new farm, or even his old farm, a 1.5 acre market garden. They source their melons, potatoes, and winter squash from a neighboring grower to put in their food basket. They don't even grow that stuff because they can make so much more money on the other stuff to get more rotations out of their beds. So that's the general rule of thumb. The larger you are, the lower on the scale. The smaller the farm, the higher on the scale. That's how you make more money on small land.